We'll start out. Good morning, everybody. There we go. Thank you very much.
Good morning, Marty.
Thank you very much. I like to make sure people respond like that so we know they're paying attention. I mean, you came here to get informed, and maybe we'll entertain you at the same time, but I want you to pay attention. When we did this panel in the fall, it was the day before Back to the Future Day. It was October 20, 2015. Back to the Future Day was October 21, 2015, going back to, I think, Back to the Future 2. We had a little discussion on that. So the first question for the audience really is, do you know what today is?
May the 4th.
Be with you.
May the 4th be with you. It's Star Wars Day. And actually, you'll hear Chris Edwards say in a few moments when he does his introduction, he's got a little bit of Star Wars and Lucasfilm in his background. And I have Star Wars and Lucasfilm in my background. I'll give you about 30 seconds worth of that after. But what I want to do is, in putting this into context so you get the comments and discussion points that we're going to have, I'm going to read to you what the written topic title is. It'll put the rest of what we're saying, really make it more meaningful. So as new technologies come on stream for creating and distributing content, the overall experience is changing dramatically, from cinema experience to the ways in which we enjoy the movies at home, and increasingly and more significantly on mobile devices. Global audiences are attracted to more immersive experience, from the uptick that IMAX and other premium large formats have earned to massive visual effects extravaganzas, and on to the forthcoming rollout of virtual reality headsets from many high-profile organizations. Alternative content in the form of concerts such as the Met and rock concerts fill seats on non-peak days and at times as the venues seek higher occupancy. On the horizon is virtual reality, a technology that promises quote-unquote in-your-face immersive experience. Lots of hype surrounds VR, but there's a lot of money chasing companies at all points on the content creation value chain, and that's going to continue as that medium develops. Our distinguished panel, this group right here, who's bright and smiley faces, is uniquely qualified to provide deep insight into the many strategies and tactics that form the basis for content development decisions and in turn release schedules, first and second screen technologies, VR, and other related technologies as we look to the future. I'm going to ask each of the panelists to take a moment to give us their quick 1 minute about who they are, what they do, and how it fits into what we're going to talk about today. To my immediate left, Doug Darrow from Dolby.
Oh, so
Please.
all right.
You're my immediate left, right?
Yes, for now.
Okay, checking.
So Doug Darrow, I run the cinema business at Dolby. Obviously, Dolby is involved in a whole variety of different solutions for the entertainment industry. In the cinema business, we make a variety of products that go into the movie theater for playing back a digital movie, be that an audio processor or a video playback device. We also have a Dolby Cinema technology, which is more of a complete branded experience that is anchored by a very high dynamic range laser-based projection system, and a variety of other businesses that serve the cinema industry. So we're all about trying to advance the experience of a more immersive display of audio and imaging, and we have a whole array of different technologies and businesses that aim to do that.
Thank you. And to his left, Chris Edwards from the third floor.
So, personally, I've been creating real-time digital worlds for about 20 years now. And, it all sort of came together after I worked at Disney Feature Animation on a couple of their pioneering movies. I worked with George Lucas directly on the third floor of the Skywalker Ranch House, where we prototyped Star Wars Episode 3 using computer animation, a process that's now known as previs. So the third floor incorporated is now not on the third floor of a building, but we're down here in Los Angeles, and we've created the world's largest previs studio, so that when We're working on films these days to create like movies like Jungle Book and Gravity and Mad Max and Marvel movies and the future Star Wars movies. We are actually using the same tools and techniques that are required for much of virtual reality. So we've actually turned the corner. In addition to our film work and theme park work and other things, we're combining all of that into a very serious effort in virtual reality, which is under the banner of VRC, the Virtual Reality Company. So it's an alliance of a bunch of different directors, including Robert Stromberg, the director of Maleficent, two-time Academy Award winner, and our advisor and partner, Steven Spielberg. So we're very serious about this.
And to his left, Phil Groves from IMAX.
Thanks, Marty. I head up worldwide distribution for IMAX, and we are a company, as I'm sure most of you know, that provides not only in-theater technology for presentation of these great, awesome Hollywood tentpole films, but we're also involved with the inception of these movies, working with the filmmakers who often use our cameras and incorporate the IMAX format as they envision their project and how they view it, ultimately ending up in the movie theaters across the land and around the world. Last year, IMAX crossed $1 billion in box office just from the IMAX screens around the world for the first time in our history, and this year continues to unfold in a rather fantastic way, as the next gentleman might say.
And gentleman's a good word, Bob Lenahan from AMC Theaters.
Good morning. So I'm president of programming for AMC. I've been in this role for the past 7 years exactly. Today's my anniversary. But a 40-year exhibitor veteran, always been in exhibition. So AMC is this, as of today, the second largest movie theater company in the U.S. We're owned by a company called Wanda in China, and I'm responsible for maintaining the studio relationships as well as relationships with the gentleman to my right, Mr. Groves, and Mr. Darrow from Dolby. So it's a pretty active role in managing the film relationships, but also the alternative content piece that Marty referenced earlier.
And last but not least, Duncan Stewart from Deloitte.
Yeah,
Takes
so,
first prize for the distance traveled today.
and least hair. I need to change jobs. Hollywood apparently have better hairlines. So I'm the director of research for Deloitte in the area of technology, media, and telecommunications. Every year for 16 years now, Deloitte publishes an annual report called Predictions. In this year's 2016 report, we wrote about virtual reality. We wrote about the future of the North American box office, cinema box office, as well as esports, which is another thing that's looking at using virtual reality in the near future. And in past years, we've talked about things like augmented reality, 3D in movies, 3D in TV, as well as 4K TV, stuff like that. So,
Thank you. And I said last but not least, but I'm going to take a turn also. Marty Schindler, CEO of the Schindler Perspective. We have a husband and wife consulting team. I'm the husband side of that. And between us, we have a Big Four professional service firm, top 5 business school background, additional experience at companies such as Fox, MGM, Lucasfilms, Industrial Light and Magic, Kodak Startup, and Bank of America. Through the years, we've worked at almost every point on the entertainment and entertainment technology value chain, both on a horizontal basis and many of the points on the vertical chain. The Star Wars story that I want to say in about 2 sentences, and Bob, for your anniversary, may the Force be with you, or was with you. Way back about, I'll just say late 70s, George Lucas and Lucasfilm hired somebody from 20th Century Fox to be their CFO. Star Wars had only been out for a couple of years. That caused a chain of events for which I was created an opening out of that chain of events for which I was recruited out of Coopers and Lybrand, which today is PricewaterhouseCoopers. I went to work at Fox. 8.5 years later, went back to Coopers in the entertainment practice, during which time we brought in Lucasfilm as a client. I was assigned to that company, got involved in a big consulting study on their business side of the company, after they'd already won 7 Academy Awards and 4 Technical Achievement Awards, and then later went to work for the company. So there's all these little Star Wars threads that are out there, and I think everybody's got a Star Wars story. If we have time, maybe we'll do a panel on that next year for May the 4th be with you. Well, let's move on here. A lot of changes going on in the industry these days. The future of film is focused in a lot of respects on the cinema experience. We had a discussion a few minutes ago about making sure that for the Jungle Book, for example, if you're going to see it, that's one clearly to see at a theater. Chris gave it raving reviews when I spoke to you last week for that. So a simple goal of movie distribution and exhibition is to get people away from their sophisticated TVs, many of which have high-end sound systems. There are a lot of changes going on, perhaps more so than at any other time, perhaps more so than when there was a major construction boom in the 90s towards multiplexes, stadium seating, and at a time when the digital conversion was going on. So we're now seeing a lot of other technology changes, laser projection, larger auditoriums. How are these things going? Well, when will these changes be pervasive? How are they going to get people, regardless of vendor, get people out of their seats at home? We become couch potatoes. What's going to make a difference and keep that cinema experience going? Who's got it?
I can probably start with that. A lot of our activity is around how do you make the cinematic experience something truly different. You know, we came up with a next generation surround sound technology called Dolby Atmos, and we launched that in the cinemas, and we have about 16 or 1,700 movie theaters around the world that use that sound system. I also, and so when we talk to a filmmaker or when we talk to a sound mixer, they will say there's no better place to experience the movie than with a full theater with powerful speakers all around you. You know, we've developed a high dynamic range projection system, as there are others in the marketplace today. But when you look at that presentation on a big screen with that sound system that I just described, you can't recreate that experience anywhere. And so what's happening today is the investment that's going into the theatrical experience, and it goes everywhere from the technology stuff that I'm talking about to seats, right? Perhaps the biggest trend in the U.S. Exhibitors right now is putting big, comfortable recliner chairs into movie theaters, and every major theater chain is investing in making the cinematic experience better, and technology companies like Dolby are trying to do that as well. And so I think you see that now around the world, in different regions are trying different things, but there's a big focus on how do you make this big screen experience something really special that you can't get anywhere else. And let's face it, you can't recreate the experience of enjoying a story with a whole bunch of other people. It's a social human experience that you don't recreate any other way. And there's a craving for that as human beings. And we've seen it happen for, well, ever since people have been around. So I think there's a lot going on in that area, and it's a pretty exciting time to be going back to the movies and seeing a big screen experience.
What about creature comforts? I think, Bob, you were about to speak up on
Yeah,
that.
I was just going to echo what Doug was saying. You know, our industry is over 100 years old, but we're still finding ways to innovate. And some things kind of boggle the imagination, because when we started, I think AMC was really the first company to begin the reseating with the luxury recliners. We took out half the seats in an auditorium and found that we doubled our attendance because people just enjoyed the experience so much. So in addition to the seating and the tremendous sound that Dolby Atmos provides, and the laser projection that both Dolby and IMAX are now providing, the seats are a big thing. And another thing that people really enjoy in our theaters is food selection and alcohol selection. I think, you know, AMC has, I think, 130 bars in our 380 theaters right now. So it's something that people really enjoy. Everything we do at AMC is to try and differentiate from the home experience and make it worthwhile to come to the theater.
So you've brought the couch out of the home and into the theater in a sense. But at IMAX, we're likewise very much engaged by the immersiveness of the movie-going experience. And again, we're very tied to the filmmakers in our process, from, soup to nuts, from before the film is made, while it's being made, and of course in post-production. And we have over 1,100 IMAX screens around the world and counting. And it's interesting to see the movie-going audience of all cultures around the world are very drawn to the elevated movie-going experience, and they remain obviously committed to having that experience, and a communal one where they are sitting amongst everybody in those comfortable chairs and sharing that awesome experience.
I mean, this is great stuff, but I'm a geek. I'm a numbers guy. One of the things there's two things that jumped out at me when you talk about that whole getting people back to the theaters. The movie cinema exhibition industry has done better than every other traditional form of media except live music. Print newspapers are down around 80%. You look at radio, you look at every other form of traditional media, and that the dollars, and constant dollars, from 1996 to 2016 are more or less flat. That's really remarkable in the face of the internet, right? But the other thing is that the per capita attendance is falling. It's not falling the way print newspapers are. It's not falling the way radio listening is. It's not even falling the way TV is. TV's shrinking very slightly these days. But it is declining. And I think that although you will be able to pull people out to continue to go to movies, in North America and Western Europe, the assumption that you're going to be able to pull them out significantly more is from a numbers perspective, essentially impossible. We talk about China, totally different situation, Latin America, India, so forth. But in North America, Western Europe, it's really hard to see how you could increase that per capita movie attendance figure much. It's awfully stable and it's heading the wrong way.
I'm curious about some of our prestigious panelists' opinions of the wave of virtual reality and how that might be integrated into the multiplexes that already exist.
We're going to get into some VR stuff now, but if anybody's got a quick opinion, but we definitely have some VR discussion points coming up.
'Cause, it just seems like that is, a potential opportunity to dramatically boost numbers in addition to the usual audience that's coming to the theater increasingly, hopefully, because of the accoutrements and the total guest experience being premium as opposed to the home theater.
Anybody has a quick response, go ahead, but otherwise we'll
There's
get
no
this whole
question VR
series
is
of-
going to play a role in the entertainment landscape. And I think there are various ways it can, where, one of the things that's been knocked around by some of the studios is companion pieces. You have a great big blockbuster movie, and for the fans of that movie to continue reliving the best parts of that experience, you can have a companion VR piece, and I know studios are developing these.
So it is the opposite of the experience of the shared experience of seeing the movie and laughing with a group of people at a comedy.
Not for long.
Or being Phil's hitting on me over here. But it is challenging because you are isolated. It's phenomenal. It's fascinating. Sony had a demonstration of the movie The Walk, where the French gentleman tight-roped across the World Trade Center, and when you put that helmet on, you could not step out while you're in a room like this. You just felt like you were thousands of feet above Manhattan, and it was like it really took courage to take a step, and it was just bizarre. So I think there's aspects of it. I don't think we've solved the riddle as to how to bring it into theaters. I think Phil's comments about it being a companion piece makes sense, but it's still, at least for now, more of an isolated experience than a shared.
How about a definition of a companion piece? Both of you have used that term. How about defining that? As opposed to a trailer.
Well, if you come to a theater and you have the opportunity to, as an added benefit, to take that walk experience, or something that's designed, to promote a movie, I think that helps.
Yeah. Well, I'd look at it like it's we're taking a page out of the playbook from themed entertainment or theme parks, where, you know, the main event is the movie or the big ride that you have to wait in line for or get your fast pass for, but the whole family still has fun in and around that experience because there's other stuff to do within that, which could be, or, you know, all the restaurants and other fun lounges and different ways to stay active. But this is where I think that this is going to evolve, is these kiosk-based setups that are brought in specifically to be a companion experience to a particular movie, or perhaps over time a standardization of that playback format within the theater space itself that becomes kind of its own little format that doesn't have to be so customized to a specific movie.
Is it preceded by trailers at home in VR?
Well, I mean, I think it's most useful as a post-experience to the movie, not a pre-experience to the movie. I think that the mobile world of VR is a good way to throw a few images up there and create a viral impact for free, you know, of the potential of the film experience or the VR experience together. But that you should really do the more premium experience probably after you see the movie and understand the context of what that is. But if you could kind of be let out of the movie theater after The Martian, for instance, and the kids go, "Oh my God, I can drive the Rover? No way!" And then you can just get them to upsell right into the Rover driving experience right then and there, like at a theme park.
Duncan?
It's not Hollywood, it's TV, but one of the areas where we actually already have significant companion pieces is in professional sports. Nobody watches professional sports in VR. It's very difficult to shoot. The football keeps bouncing off the cameras kind of idea. But taking a VR view and showing it to the players on the team in the game films is already a significant thing. Nobody would want to watch a game that way. It's very confusing. But if you're a quarterback, being able to watch the game films in that kind of VR view, oh, here's that linebacker coming from my blind side. That's something that they're already using, and it will be tens of millions of dollars in the next year.
You know, one of the aspects of this panel is meant to be talking about where independent film comes in. Is that an area where independent filmmakers can get involved more so than studios in terms of the VR side of it, the companion pieces that go with their movies?
I don't see that. I mean, the independent film world is struggling right now. They're really strong. Independent films are few and far between, which isn't to say that they're gone, but I think there's more pressure on that segment of our business from Netflix and Amazon, although Amazon is now in the distribution business also. So they're bringing their content, their feature content into theaters first, which is great as far as we're concerned. But I don't really see the indie piece.
So is that a
dovetailing with-
recommendation that if there's an independent filmmaker in the audience, that they might be best served, instead of trying to get theatrical distribution, that they might be better off with an online type of distribution?
To be seen, yes, but I'm not sure what the economics are in that. Question?
We'll get to some questions. I always leave time, 10 or 15 minutes toward the end. Write it down, don't forget it. And we may even cover your answer by the time we get there. A lot of consolidation going on in the industry. AMC is buying Carmike, NBC is buying DreamWorks. Paramount is reeling right now from their problems. What's kind of going on in the industry that could be changing, like consolidation? Or other things going on that these people might want to know about, should know
Well,
about, public information?
The thing that I would note, and we see this as a great benefit from an IMAX point of view, is the studios are becoming, and this sort of touches on the comment Bob just made about independent movies. The studios are becoming far more focused on the creation of these tentpole movies. They'd rather swing for the fences than swing at all on a movie that actually might have a greater chance at failing at the box office, even though it's a smaller bet in terms of the production costs, et cetera. So that is something that seems to be a very clear trend. The studios are focusing on the so-called tentpoles, the blockbuster films, and that's more the diet of the movies they're producing these days.
You really have and Phil's absolutely right. I mean, you have a movie like Deadpool which in what used to be considered off playtime, does $300 million. Jungle Book opening to $100 million a few weeks ago. And these are great movies. They didn't do it by accident. And Captain America, is poised to do, some think over $200 million this weekend alone. On the flip side of that, although there is consolidation happening, and there is pressure, as I said before, on the independent film, you have small companies that are just opening up in recent years, like Bleecker Street and Broad Green. I mentioned Amazon as another, a company that's out there, and they're basically taking their movies to market by using various different studios. Like Roadside Attractions will distribute a movie for Amazon. Broad Green has one coming up. Open Road, which is a company AMC owns jointly with Regal Cinemas, has a documentary coming out through Amazon. So Phil's right. There's the blockbusters are, bigger than ever. Conversely, movies, there's no bottom is something that people are saying now, where you have movies like Hardcore Henry opening up to almost zero box office, or The Brothers Grimsby, or any number of movies this past fall, just that you thought you'd at least be able to get a $5 or $8 million opening weekend number, will do just nothing. So you really have the extremes of the blockbusters, and then the possibility of a movie just not coming to market at all.
Does that become a marketing issue, though, for getting movies like Hardcore Henry out there, or is it just the fact that word gets out and it's a bad movie? I don't know anything about that particular movie other than noting it didn't do a whole lot of business recently.
Well, I think it's the blockbuster concept is also synonymous with branded content, and and the new innovative ideas have a tough time, I think, breaking through all of the other options, entertainment options that today's moviegoers and otherwise entertainment seekers have to choose from.
And people are a lot more savvy about what's out, through social media, where before you'd be able to advertise a movie on network television and guarantee a certain amount of moviegoers. But that's a lot more challenging now, because most people are not really watching network television, or they're certainly not watching the commercials that millions of dollars are spent on to promote movies. So there are a lot of challenges out there.
I think all the restructuring and the turmoil is natural and good, because that means there's an adaptation to the trends that are changing the world of media, so that the studios need to do this to stay relevant and to stay abreast of all the new distribution models, for one. It's also very difficult to make tentpole movies because it's so much technology, so many layers, so many aspects that need to come together. So internally, we've been seeing a lot of inward looking at their own processes within studios, trying to recommend new standards, new departments working together in a more of a kumbaya sort of way. If they don't have that expertise, they bring it in-house, or they make an alliance with another company that can do that. And also, I think that this is part and parcel of the development process in Hollywood being notoriously wasteful. And if you're going to be spending bigger bucks per project, one needs to look at that with greater scrutiny than they could do before, with the sort of mutual fund of projects that they would send out and then try in the aggregate to get some to carry the weight of the rest.
So with the big bucks that are being spent, and this weekend expected to be a huge weekend for Captain America, does that say that perhaps more of this ought to be spread out a little bit instead of totally jamming everything into the so-called summer season? Even though, movies do well at other times, Star Wars and Rogue One and Star Wars 8 will all be December releases. Is there really an argument for really trying to extend it?
Well, as Bob noted earlier, Deadpool, a February release, grossed like a summer title.
And Batman versus Superman released in March, another $300 million movie. So I think that there's the calendar's expanded to where there really isn't, with the possible exception of Labor Day, a bad weekend to open a movie that people are really anxious to see.
You mentioned
Please.
trends in the exhibition space. I think there's a really interesting trend there. The big exhibitors are getting even bigger, right? With Wanda, which is essentially the biggest exhibitor in China, having a majority interest in AMC, you see this incredible amount of screen count under one company, right? You have 3 exhibitors once Carmike goes into AMC, assuming that happens. You'll have 3 exhibitors that control, half the screens in the United States or something like that. You've got these very well capitalized, very big exhibitors around the world getting even bigger, right? And so I think that's an interesting dynamic as well. You also see them willing to invest in the cinematic experience, right? The number of premium screens, like IMAX used to be the only company doing that. And I don't know how many brands there are that are trying to do a version of a premium screen now, including Dolby. There's, at last count, I think 70 kind of homegrown exhibitor brands trying to position a high-end or a premium cinema solution. And when there were, a few years ago, hundreds of those, there are now over a couple thousand. And so the high-end part of the market is also what's getting a lot of investment. So, I think there's some interesting trends that will influence back what's happening from the standpoint of how studios both invest in projects and distribute content as well.
How does 3D enter into the equation? I mean, it seems like it's plateaued at about 15% of box office here in North America, or is 3D really primarily being done for the China and other parts of Asia market?
Well, there's no question that a number of the overseas markets are more predisposed to buying 3D presentation. The playing field is uneven. You have markets like North America, like Korea, the UK, and some others where the 3D experience is not something that the consumer chases after maybe as much as they do in China and Russia and some of the other markets. So there is interest in 3D, and the studios continue to focus on it, but you're going to see, I think, the trends continue of a greater diversity between 2D and 3D on a so-called 3D title.
Explain diversity in that context.
Well, a mix of shows, and within the same theater, you'll find that 3D title having a good, healthy presence and as 2D only to complement the 3D show schedule.
Duncan?
Fairly obviously, there was some level of potential competition of 3D at home versus in theater. For those of you who weren't following, last month Samsung stopped making 3D TV sets. Not partly at all. They just don't make them anymore. There's just not enough consumer demand. 3D gaming was a thing. It kind of spiked. It kind of went a little bit of a blip, and then a lot of people realized they'd rather play just in 2D. I mean, there's still 3D games out there, but it certainly hit a plateau, and it may even be dropping off that plateau as well.
So 3D, I thought we talked about this a little bit earlier. Avatar, when it came out in 2009, was just a phenomenal 3D experience. It was quickly followed by Alice in Wonderland, and then The Year of the Dragon. So you had like a trifecta of great, diverse 3D experiences. And then, just to speak candidly, I think exhibition got a little carried away in what we charged, particularly for family 3D movies. And I think that corrupted the marketplace, at least for the family movies, which isn't to say that there aren't films that are still being made and for adult audiences. Jungle Book is arguably, a movie for young adults, but for adults, and it's superb 3D, as was Gravity, as was Life of Pi. So I think it's still a thing. I think consumers are going to be more selective about what they're going to choose to see in 3D. But I would argue, using Gravity as an example, you just must see that movie in 3D. It's just such a great experience.
And I would also say that I would echo all those comments. You still have a handful of filmmakers that really believe in the 3D format. I mean, not like just a little bit. It's like they want their movies to be seen that way, right? And they'd almost, if they could control it, say, I don't want it to be shown in 2D in a theater, I just want it to be shown in 3D, right? Jon Favreau being the most recent, who said, you've got to see this movie in 3D, in Jungle Book. So there's still that handful of filmmakers that really want that and really push for it. But I'd say equally, there's some that are like, you know what, I don't know that I care that much about it. So it's just an interesting time for it, and it's hard to predict how it's going to go, and it is quite different market by market. Even in Europe, you go look across European countries, there's some that 3D does great in, and there's some that it's like almost non-existent, right? So it's very different.
I mean, I think there's a difference between the made for 3D by the discerning filmmaker that has self-control over what they do in 3D and the choices so that you're using it for the right storytelling reason, and the mass-produced converted film with lower standards that has, I think, also contributed to a family here or there, wherever they are, having a bad experience. And as soon as they have one bad experience, whether it be bad projection or bad in the actual film creation process itself, it's kind of all over. They'll just go back to what used to work.
Totally agree with that.
Has it varied in terms of the previous work that you're doing, in terms of how much time and energy producers and directors in particular are spending on 3D?
Well,
You do all the Marvel movies, for example.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the scale and scope of the endeavor. So if it's a movie that has so many visual effects and lots of digital environments, then it pretty much has to be 3D anyways, because you're putting that together as a 3D render. So you might as well go to the extra effort of making it a made for 3D, highly crafted film. The other films that are a little bit more where it's supporting visual effects to a traditional story, we find that we're not really paying attention to the 3D because that's usually the one that opts for just convert and post. But that's a decision that hasn't even been made until they go and start shooting and start seeing some of the results, usually, in that type of film. But certainly the bigger tentpole movies tend to go, yep, we're doing a 3D release. And actually that's becoming more and more significant as a result of the virtual reality potential offshoot experience. Not watching the entire movie in virtual reality, but being able to take the assets that we build and curate in 3 dimensions. If they're set up that way, then why not bring that into part of the VR experience?
So assets that you're creating, models and the like, are moving from previs into the VR experience?
Yeah, I mean, that's the challenge, right? Everyone is confused about how to do this because we inherently here among the Hollywood crowd just have never, most of us have never really sat down with a game engine programmer or a developer of games. Usually it's kind of thought of as the sort of, oh, we just outsource or license the rights to that amazing game studio to go and make a derivative game from their past game that just has our brand. So these days, it's like reinventing the wheel within Hollywood of how we treat our digital asset base so that it doesn't go too far before we consider the branching to the virtual reality experience at the moment right before we hand it off to visual effects, because they need to have their own workflow and pipeline.
So when you've got production and distribution considerations early on, you got to be thinking ahead that a year from now, and certainly 2 years from now, China will be the #1 box office country in the world. Probably before long, North America will then be #2. Before long, current #5, India, is likely to be 4, 3, and at some point 2. That's probably a little further out there. UK and Japan are close behind, are 3 and 4, and Korea is #6. How often are the growth of those areas taken into account when production decisions are being made and distribution decisions?
Well, I mean, from IMAX's standpoint, the big markets have our attention in terms of growing our network, but we've also been involved with movies that have very much a global awareness in how they cast the film and maybe where the locations are for the big action set pieces. I think in the last Transformer film that you actually saw some product placement of Japanese drinks, and as of course actors in the next Star Wars. I forget the actor's name. I think it's a big Japanese actor or Chinese. I can't remember which. But the studios are very cognizant of the global landscape, and they take that into consideration, without necessarily compromising the intention of the film.
And when you speak to the expansion of the Chinese market, it's really remarkable that here in North America and virtually around the world, people had to reinvent the infrastructure that didn't really exist in China. So when you go back to 2005, when 3D first started, there were virtually no cinemas in China. So as Wanda and other Chinese exhibitors started to deploy theaters, and they're being built to the tune of 22 screens per day in China, where Wanda alone added 1,000 screens last year alone. But you have a coalescence of that industry growing up at the same time as digital projection, 3D, and loyalty programs in theaters. So they didn't have to reinvent the theaters that already existed. They were creating them, along with the social media and all that. So it's pretty fascinating, which is why, to Phil's point, they're employing Asian actors, or Asian elements in particular, in movies that are being released by Hollywood.
It seems to me there are kind of two factions at work. It's the Hollywood crowd, like you said, understanding China, giving China respect, and trying to adapt our Western content to play well and to get accepted past SARFT and China Film Group into the marketplace, which is a whole, political sensitive area. At the same time, what I see is we're being invited in to become part of the producers, directors, and writers of the future in China. Being part of the sort of pre-production zone of or phase of production. A lot of people underestimate China and what's about to happen. There are some great filmmakers there already, and there's a whole new generation of bright-eyed and intelligent and super amazing filmmakers that are just, once they get access to the tools and are embracing the new workflows, that it's going to break out a lot more than Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon did in the past.
Well, I think it's safe to say that the entities like SARFT and CFG are going to make sure that happens, right? I mean, they are going to ensure that local product is both invested in and developed and distributed, right? They effectively modulate what happens in the marketplace to ensure that the local product has a chance to survive. If they didn't, the Hollywood movies would just dominate a lot of the screens, and that would be the way it would go. But they don't let that happen, right? And so they are, by default, going to bring along that content industry. And you see all of those moves happening, whether it's Wanda buying Legendary or different other entities putting in place the ability to fund production projects. I mean, it's just
So as that happens, what's the likelihood, I mean, that's to grow their own domestic industries. What's the likelihood of more movies getting sent this way?
Well, that's happening now. AMC had an exclusive arrangement with a company called China Lion back in 2010 that expired about the same time that the Wanda ownership took place. And the box office was very minimal, and we only played the movies where we had large, Chinese populations: Toronto, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Chicago. But that business has expanded very rapidly. I think we're up in Asian film alone like 130% in the first quarter of this year versus last year. There was a movie that opened this past weekend that did a tremendous business, and I think had the highest per location average of any movie, actually, like $14,000 this past weekend. So that segment of the business is expanding, as is the Hindu. The Bollywood movies are expanding rapidly as well, and we're also seeing Filipino films working, and Korean movies working, and Latino movies working. So there's various other forms of movie entertainment.
So when they're exhibited here in North America, are there audiences primarily from that part of the world, descendants from that? I don't mean to make that a statement of the obvious, but you probably have the statistics to either support or refute that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's mainly Chinese people who are going to see these movies. I don't think very many of them break out. beyond that core audience. So, our top theater is in Monterey Park, where you have a huge Asian population.
Well, IMAX in China has been very involved with the local productions there. We are probably putting in about a half a dozen movies a year at least into the IMAX format, working with the filmmakers over a year. And there's also movement afoot where the studios and the Chinese production companies are becoming very collaborative in their efforts. The Chinese film industry is getting more sophisticated, as Chris says, and greater effort is being employed to sort of bring the Chinese filmmakers and all of their talents into sort of more, I don't know how else to put it, into sort of our sense of mainstream sensibilities. They're bringing in people from the West into China to work with the filmmakers to help them structure their stories a little bit different so that their product will ultimately translate into the markets outside of China better than they currently do.
So it's going both directions. We're becoming more of a global filmmaking community, I think.
Moving on a little bit, last thing on film specifically, dynamic pricing. That surfaces every once in a while. Any real hope on that? Phil's got a big smile from ear to ear on his face when I said that. So,
Well, only that it seems to come up every time we've had one of these panels, I think. That might be my imagination. But it's, pricing is determined by exhibition. And I, having once worked in exhibition, I know there's a tendency to not want to use pricing as a way of conveying a good movie different from a bad movie, or accidentally telegraph that message unintentionally to the consumer. So the pricing differences are now really sort of hinged to the various ways you can see a movie, not so much, a Marvel film versus an independently produced film.
So moving on a little bit, 4 out of the 5 of you have.
I think he has something to say.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
That's okay, Marty. I want to include Duncan in case he had something to say as well. But there's a new ticketing format called ATOM, ATOM, and our new CEO, Adam, ADAM, is very interested in it. And part of that, we will be exploring, at least at AMC, dynamic pricing, discount pricing in some situations. It's challenging, as Phil referenced, but we think there might be an opportunity to charge more at peak times on peak movies than we normally would, and to discount movies that people are not seeking out at a more rapid rate if we can. So we're kind of open to it. We don't have any data, or we haven't done the test as of yet, but they're coming.
So it's reactive to the audience's interest.
Yeah.
I saw the Atom demo at CinemaCon. It was actually very, very good for all the reasons that you cite. And, dynamic pricing is something that studios are using now. If you go to Universal Theme Park, if you go to the Disney parks, go to all sorts of places where, or parking in the middle of London. Some days you can park for, whatever. I don't even want to quote any prices there, but supply and demand is really what it comes down to, basic economic principles.
And reserve seating is something that we're embracing more now than we had in a while. And that's something that works really well in congested urban areas, but not so much in the hinterlands. So that's another aspect of it.
What about double feature discounts?
Welcome to 1962.
They happen anyways.
When
true.
was a
The
double
unofficial,
feature
yeah.
ever on a billboard? When was the last time? 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 25 years ago? Is it happening anywhere now, maybe other than using your term, the hinterlands?
Didn't Tarantino make a movie that was a double feature a few years ago? I don't know. It's not something that people generally don't have the appetite to sit through 2 features. Having said that, we've had a lot of success with marathons when these tentpole movies come out, or even the Academy Awards. We've had Best Picture Showcase where people will actually in one day sit through 8 features. So, and that is for one price, but not so much the double feature, but all the Avengers movies, or all the Batman movies, or all the Academy Award nominees, that type of thing.
Yeah, we have some Deloitte research on, I mean, we call it binge watching when we do it on TV. Why don't we binge on movies? Right, 60, 70% of people are binge watching at least once a month. When you go younger demos, 1834, you're into the 80s. So there is significant app. Now, the definition of binge on TV is, I think it's 3 hours at a stretch. So 3 one-hour episodes. So obviously, once you're talking about 90 to 120-minute films, binging starts changing a little.
And you're probably referring primarily to things like Netflix.
It would be almost exclusively things like Netflix.
Okay. But what's interesting about it, people attribute the term binge watching to Netflix, when it really started, in my opinion, when TV on DVD came out. When VHS was around, you couldn't sell a single episode, let alone a season of a TV show. I mean, you would need 12 VHS tapes for 12 episodes. But once DVD came around, it was easy to do that, and people did binge watch, especially just before the next season started. So Netflix gets some credit for maybe popularizing that. Anyway, let's move on a little bit, because we talked about, in the title about VR and other immersive experiences. 4 out of the 5 of you have some form of VR relationship, directly or indirectly, with your companies. Both IMAX and Dolby are investors in Jaunt VR, which has one of the really high-end camera systems. Chris's company is involved in VR through a sister company. Duncan's done a lot of research. And if I'm leaving you out on this, Bob, in some fashion that's not intentional, Bob will just be the guy who sits there with the goggles and decides what we're all going to see in that big auditorium. We're still in the early days. 2 of the major vendors, HTC and Sony, really haven't released their headsets yet. Facebook's Oculus, the presumptive, keyword presumptive market leader, it's the word of the week, I think, is having challenges in getting orders fulfilled. So, but nevertheless, all that says there's high expectations. And yet I look at the Gartner hype cycle. Let me ask, how many people are familiar with the Gartner hype cycle? It's something you need to look at when it comes to some new technologies. The first part of it, it's a loop that goes down and up. And it starts out with a technology trigger. It becomes a peak of inflated expectations, followed by a trough of disillusionment, a slope of enlightenment, and then onto the plateau of productivity. And it happens with movies. It happened significantly with 3D not too long ago. Is it going to happen with VR? Are we going to go through a Gartner hype cycle routine? I think you're shaking your head.
Why don't I start off? Yes. Okay, are we done now? No. It's how severe is the trough? How bad is the trough? The hype, the peak's real high. The folks out there who do numbers on sales started at 5, took it to 4, took it to 3 last week. We're at 1. We're at $1 billion. So our number for this year is $1 billion, and everybody else is gradually moving their numbers down. You've got Morgan Stanley out there with a $20 billion number by 2020, and virtually nobody in the world I've met actually believes that one. So how low does the trough get? So one of the things I wanted to start off with, which is 2 really quick things. One, who here remembers paper anaglyph glasses from 3D movies? What did that do to the 3D adoption cycle? Delayed it by about 30 years. A bad, uncomfortable, visually terrible experience harms it. So there's a lot of really low-end VR stuff out there. Google Cardboard's probably the best known one, but there's a lot of others. People out there are trying it, and when people try Cardboard, they actually become less likely, less interested in VR. So having the low visual quality, physical discomfort, air gaps, and do I need to mention the vomiting? The motion sickness stuff. 30-40% of people become violently ill with the low quality experience. So that's going to be a big problem. But the other one is, how often do people do this? I was talking to a hardcore gamer. He's got a liquid cooled PC for gaming, so he can overclock his graphics processor. He is going to buy HTC and Oculus both because he loves the idea that much. But when he estimates how much of his gaming is going to be in VR versus just using a monitor, he says, and this is why I'm glad we got IMAX here, he says he thinks of it almost exactly like IMAX. There's certain products, once or twice or 3 times, or maybe for IMAX more, but it's not every movie. It's something you do occasionally, once or twice a month. It's a high-end, it's a unique experience. It's something you'll pay through the nose for, but it's not something that becomes the dominant mode of gaming. So I wanted to start off with that, maybe give some shape to the conversation.
I wanted to chime in about that because I do think that gaming will be that initial sort of driver of people, the enthusiasts you talk about, the prosumers that already have that souped out PC or are itching to get that new graphics card. That's going to happen. That's the peak in the near term. However, I think that the long term, what is it, the plateau of awesomeness or whatever you were saying, has to do a
Plateau
lot.
of productivity.
Yes, has a lot to do more with the storytelling aspects and potential in VR and AR in the future, which is more centered around the mainstream audience. Because I look at this as a spectrum of from the gaming side being best if it's a completely open world, like it's Minecraft or some kind of World of Warcraft thing where you can tell your own stories in a completely open-ended experience. Or on the other end of the spectrum, you've got your traditional filmmaking passive experience where it's crafted by Christopher Nolan and it's exactly the way Christopher Nolan wants it and all of his knobs are tweaked exactly the way it should be projected. But in the middle of that, I think, is an area of great curiosity that plays to human desire for wish fulfillment, for being immersed in someone else's dream or vision. And although the early examples from mobile VR are in some ways detrimental, some of them, to people's impressions of VR, if the consumers and average families get a good experience or two from the room scale VR that actually you can move around in and get parallax in and not feel sick because you're doing the movement for the most part. That's a completely different mind-blowing experience that people, I think, will differentiate in their minds, and it will not be destructive to the regular theater industry and all of that progress, but I think it will just be an additive experience that's new. But it's going to take a little while for people to get enough of that gear in their homes. So that's why I think it's so important that perhaps you guys, if you believe that it's not going to be destructive to your business, to maybe be one of the drivers of exhibiting that tech, kind of embrace it instead of keep it out, so that people can try that out and get that kind of experience for the companion experience beyond
Are you
the
suggesting
movie.
that when you go to your local AMC, then that maybe there's an auditorium where 50 people could have clean headsets and try it?
Well, just-
Am I hearing
I'm
you
just
right?
I'm just curious. I don't know what the maximum usage of a typical multiplex is, but what if you were to convert one of those theaters into a VR experience room? How over time, how does that work out? Can you get people to come to your theme park like experience, that includes watch a movie and go see the VR experience and of course have dinner?
I
Dinner
think
follows, right?
I think if anybody wanted to do that and was willing to pay buy a ticket to do it, then there would be those. They would happen. I struggle with why somebody would really want to do that and go into a big empty room and put a set of goggles on and not really have a social experience with the other people around them. I don't want to sound like, well, I'm just not in touch with any new technology because, this is going to happen. I struggle with seeing it in that space, right? What we do is we developed an audio technology called Dolby Atmos that would put sound anywhere in a three-dimensional space and make it more like real life, and it's called object-based sound. And so we break all of the sound information into individual objects, and then we define the Cartesian coordinates of where it needs to be, and we put it there, right? And we found that all of a sudden that was a perfect technology for a headset display, right? You could then have spatial head tracking, and so you moved your head and you looked at something over here, but the sound stayed over there where you were looking at it before. And so we try to invest in technologies that make that a more realistic, more lifelike experience. We work on high dynamic range display technologies, not from a display standpoint, but from a content standpoint, preserving dynamic range to create more perceived sharpness to the human eye, more realism. And so I think that's another element to this, right? When you look at a phone 3 inches from your eyes, you see the pixelization. It kind of takes you out of that experience. But if you get to a display that's got very high dynamic range, a spatial audio experience, you start to get to a place where you might see how this could work in some way. But I still struggle seeing it in a big movie theater where I don't need the screen in front of me anymore because I've got this little one in front of my face.
Well, IMAX has a lot of feelers into the VR world that's beginning to unfold, and you know, Marty, you made reference to one of them, and there are other ways that I can't really expand on. But I can also tell you, in talking to all of the studios that we do business with, they're very busy with trying to understand this evolving world. And I've been to a couple of these VR LA conferences, and you know, this past year's was at least twice, if not bigger, in size than the one before that. And all of the studios are trying to find ways to incorporate VR, maybe as a complementary form of entertainment. Rarely do I ever hear that it's in place of anything. So I think that's kind of the direction that the industry is going.
Okay, a little while ago, Chris used the word, and maybe later, AR. There's a big school of thought out there when they look at VR, AR. Some people think they're synonymous. They're not. AR actually today is moving forward in the enterprise for a lot of different things. Thoughts on that?
Well, I think that eventually VR and AR are going to merge into the same headset, and it's just going to be whether or not the lens goes opaque for a moment in time, and then you become immersed fully in the media. And I think that media is going to get more and more convincing, more high dynamic range. You won't be able to see any kind of pixels. But specifically about AR, I think in the near term it's going to be more about productivity and office-like applications that will kind of lead the charge. You see that with Microsoft's HoloLens. There's fun stuff to do, and you're going to want to show it off at parties for sure. But I think the better storytelling medium, just like in a theater, is to keep the doors shut and the lights down and the sound feeling great, you know. And that's what VR can already do to some extent right now. And that experience is going to get better and better and better. But the last thing I'll say is that anyone having trepidation about VR being a kind of a danger to like running into something, if you get immersed in the field of flowers and you're running and you slam into the wall, you know, the AR is going to be a near-term solution to that. You see on the HTC Vive, for example, rumor has it they're going to turn on that front-facing camera that no one seems to be talking about, which will give you at least some kind of reference if you get close enough to your sister or a dog or something that wasn't expected to be in the space. Oh, there she is. And then you just sort of have to step back into the volume of safety. So I think it's going to be a long evolution for AR, but ultimately AR has the conceit to be more widely adopted in VR by the average person. But as soon as it becomes cool and small enough to not be obtrusive to your daily
Duncan?
work.
So there's we talk about this a lot in the enterprise. So just to size it again, our expectation for VR hardware and software this year is $1 billion. That's gaming. What could that be? 2, 3, 4 billion? Sure. What do we see in terms of home entertainment and movies? Not much bigger. There's just it's that whole isolation. There seem to be some real limitations there. Too few people have the computer hardware. Their estimate's only about 15 million computers in the world actually powerful enough to run the full-end VR headsets, so there's a challenge there. We look at the enterprise market, and it's about 10 times bigger. Real estate, training, AR works massively well there. The idea that you're a utility worker, you show up in front of an electrical panel that's live that you've never seen before. It shows you which leads are hot and which ones are off. The reason I think that this matters so much is that if you take a look at the workplace today, there's all kinds of people, arc welders, pharmacists, people wearing goggles as part of their job. It's what you do, it's part of the job condition. People do it, they do it cheerfully. There's a paycheck at the end. It makes your job safer or better in some way. But my problem is that if anybody here wearing glasses, my glasses are in my bag. They have plastic lenses. That's because they weigh about 3/4 of an ounce. The old ones at 1.5 ounces were too heavy, so I moved to plastic. Even if we look at VR headsets or AR headsets that get literally orders of magnitude better, just the batteries, the screens, these are things that are going to weigh 6, 7, 8 ounces for the foreseeable future. Until we're at the chips in your brain or contact lenses directly on your eyeball, we are at things that weigh multiple ounces, and we sort of have some data on that. It was called 3D TV, and people around the world don't like wearing things on their face unless you pay them to.
2 points before we move to Q&A. On the piece on your eye, Sony made an announcement yesterday, the day before, of a contact lens that will have a camera built into it, both forward and rear facing. The one that faces your eye is going to be great for advertisers. When you're watching TV, assuming that you cover all the privacy issues that need to be covered. What show are you watching? Are you watching the commercial? Or are you looking at your computer doing something else? Last point, though, and I do want to move to questions and answers. Certain genres have always been helpful in moving VHS and beta forward, DVD forward, and that's the adult entertainment industry. Is that going to have an impact, positive or negative, on VR and AR? Anybody got an opinion? You don't have to say from personal experience. Duncan, you've got an opinion?
So Deloitte pays a lot of money for me to research porn. No, that's not true. That's not. You guys were supposed to laugh at that. It's not true. We didn't cover adult, but it's come up in virtually every conversation around the world since because adult entertainment did push a lot of technology forward. So there's already VR porn available. I have not yet viewed it, but I've talked to people who have. They say it's pretty good, pretty interesting. So adult, it's already happening. It will be hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars. So that's an absolute for sure. But there's two issues that do jump out. I had a VHS in 1984. It sat there right in my living room under my TV set. Nobody walked into my living room and looked at my TV, looked at my VHS as opposed to beta machine and said, gee, you must really like adult entertainment. If VR is known as having a stigma as being primarily for adult entertainment, it will not be adopted as rapidly. That's a severe issue. The other thing is that we talked about it from the football perspective. If you're watching a game, it's really good to sit on the 50-yard line and watch the game unfold in front of you. Watching from the quarterback's position is really confusing. It's not a natural place unless you're a quarterback. Adult entertainment has a specific point of view, a specific perspective. You don't tend to spend a lot of time looking around the room admiring the ceiling tiles, right? Ideally. So I wonder about that angle. Will it be something that's done? Yes. Will it become 90% of adult entertainment?
Probably not. All right, how about questions from the audience? This gentleman right here in the white shirt.
We got really close, but I do have a bit of a...
Really close in terms of already anticipating your question?
Close to it, but I think this may be a question that Phil Gross has experienced with from digital remastering. If you don't have the domestic market to justify the revenue, which basically would be the U.S. now and China soon, and it's not coming here because we don't want to watch it, for non-English films, are they able to justify the budgets to make a product like this?
Yes, is the answer. We've done films in Japan and Russia, Korea, not just China, which is the largest overseas market for us. So we do find a way to do these films. The margins might be a little bit narrower, but we look at this as an essential step in growing our format.
And just a quick follow-up, do those films have export markets besides the U.S.?
We try to bring them out of those territories whenever possible. Stalingrad was a film that was hugely successful in Russia. We did bring it to the U.S. to, just so-so results, quite frankly. But it came in during a week when
We would have
had
killed
the
for so-so.
Besides bringing it to the U.S.
No more from this person over here. Can you turn off his microphone back there?
Besides bringing it to the U.S., are there other countries that you would export from Russia to some other country?
Yes, well, Russian films translate rather well back into China, for example. And so we do look at those opportunities for Russian titles and for China as well.
Lady right here, please.
So similar to how Netflix kind of changed TV and cable, do you guys foresee China, I know we've talked about China a lot, changing film, and with all the Chinese filmmakers and, you know, the studios investing in relationships with China, do you see that as kind of the next frontier? Are they the next Hollywood?
Well, I think they're becoming their own Hollywood, and we see, again, a lot more cooperation between Chinese companies and U.S. companies. You have it in the form of exhibition circuits, and you're going to have it in the form of studios as well. And the filmmakers, they're beginning to collaborate a lot more. And I don't think the film industry is ever going to make movies that aren't popular to the moviegoers, because there's a direct relationship between that and box office.
Yeah, and Wanda invested, I think, $20 million into the Academy, and wants to have their own, Chinese version, of the Academy. There's production facilities in China. Jeffrey Katzenberg partnered with, a Chinese group. Wanda just purchased Legendary, or is a major stockholder in Legendary Pictures. So there's a lot of progress being made, probably not just in China, but I think they're the most, obvious and dominant player internationally.
I mean, with the current government leadership, there was a decree, like they have every, I think, 5 years, of here are the important tenets of that we want all Chinese citizens to know that the government is focused on these things and in this order of importance. And number one was cultural exportation, to be interpreted, but also includes media. And I think a lot of this came out of the success of the Beijing opening ceremonies, and everyone around the world going, wow, this, that's not just a manufacturing economy. They're really smart, and there's so much artistry, and the impression that left on the world is something that the Chinese government leadership loved. And then they started seeing the way, once Hollywood kind of stepped up and started sending some of their best hits over there, and Gravity became, well, Avatar first became like the huge breakout hit, and then it was other ones like Gravity that also were widely accepted throughout all China. And then now there's a sort of the backlash to that, which is in concert with what the government has told us, let's create media that is sort of our own media, but hopefully has a good chance of playing well and exporting our culture to the rest of the world. Because if they get that silver star on their track record, then all the rest of the businesses that they're involved in will also be helped and flourish as well. So that there's a little artificial incentive going on there. But I think ultimately it's a good thing, because it's forcing everyone towards the center of sort of a global consciousness of what is the best media, the most interesting, impactful media around the world from both directions.
Doug?
Yeah, I think it's influencing rather than changing, really. I mean, because you can't not have that influence when it's going to be the scale that it is. And in reality, I think it's kind of a fast follower type of industry to the rest of the global entertainment industry. So I think it's a little twist versus they're doing something very different.
There's a lady, go ahead, please.
What about location-based entertainment in 4D and 5D and movie theaters? What about that? Is that a possibility? What are the barriers to entry? What do y'all think about that?
Are you referring to 4DX, which is it's available here at Regal's Live Downtown Theater, and probably in Koreatown. But that's an experience where you have, in addition to, sight and sound, you have, smells and scents and wind blowing in your face and, whatever to bring you more into the movie. So that's expanding a little bit. There's a company called ScreenX, which is an expansion. It's almost like a panoramic experience where the screen is expanded to the side walls. And then there's Barco Escape, which is more like, if people remember Cinerama, it's that type of thing where you have a screen that with two panels on either side of the screen to expand the experience. So
It's like 160 degrees, I think, field of view.
that's right, Marty.
You know, we've toyed with working with the D-box chairs as something that we would do at the earliest stages of conception with the filmmaker, because if they're also manipulating the image through stereo pre-production, they might as well also begin to think about the audience sensation, all the haptics and different things that they will experience during the maybe the future movie experience.
I think it's exciting because there's so many of those different things happening. Personally, I put some of them in the novelty bucket and some of them in that makes the experience better. I think the movie-going experience, if you look at all of the technologies of the last 100 years, you could make an argument that the ones that have stuck around are about creating a more immersive experience, putting you more into the story. And to the extent that one of these things does that, then I think it stays around. To the extent that it really doesn't, then I don't know that it really gets any traction. I've been in theaters where it was sponsored by Beats and everybody wore headphones, and I didn't really understand that, especially being at Dolby. It kind of didn't make sense to me. I've been at seats that were sponsored by a car company, and everybody, it was a car seat in every chair in the movie. So there's all these crazy things happening. A lot of them happen in markets outside the United States, by the way, and particularly in Asian countries where they pretty much try everything. I don't know. Some of them are going to stick and go somewhere. Some of them are going to be more like novelties that just die off. But it's pretty cool that there's so many different things like that happening in exhibition.
The gentleman right here? Go ahead.
Quick question. So I was at NAB a few weeks back and had the opportunity to see Ang Lee's, HDR, HFR, 4K, 3D presentation, Dolby Vision 3D, and everything else. And granted, there's only a handful of theaters that have that capability, but what are your guys' thoughts on keeping that moviegoer experience differentiated with the rollout of like HDR, laser projection, 3D, HDR, HFR? How do you see that rolling out and impacting potential butts and seats globally? But then also, do you see that happening more in the emerging markets like China and Eastern Europe, things like that, where there's new build-outs, or how do you see that playing out in the U.S. as well?
Well, from IMAX's point of view, we look at the filmmaker as sort of the tip of the spear. And if the filmmaker's into, did you say HDR or HFR?
You said both.
Both, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Both.
Yeah, so, we react very much to what the filmmakers are looking for. And, obviously there are filmmakers like James Cameron who love high frame rate, and, we change our systems and upgrade it and evolve along with the demands of our filmmakers.
I think it's really exciting. We'll see how Ang's movie does. He's a big believer in that, and so it is something different. The people that have seen it say that is a different experience than anything I've seen before. The Hobbit movies, there were mixed reviews about whether people like that or not. So it's really cool that the industry's experimenting with these different technologies, playing with the presentation quality in a cinema. We put a lot into R&D of various ways to improve the exhibition experience. So it's hard to say whether or not these things really catch on. Certainly frame rate is one that is likely to continue on. There's enough filmmakers that want to experiment with it, and they're learning how to artistically represent that. It's not unlike the transition from SD to HD TV, where all of a sudden it was like, wow, this really shows bad acting or bad makeup or bad set design. And so the same thing's happening in this one. You have to evolve and improve to really make benefit of it. So it's really cool that we're doing that as an industry.
Last question, go ahead.
There was a mention that IMAX was interested or had interest in VR, and I was just curious when that was said, going from something that is a very small screen to the largest screen in terms of what that level of interest is and where that's heading, and your thoughts on that.
Well, they are, we look at them as two different worlds. I mean, is the short answer. I don't know if that answered the question. That's the best one I've got.
If it doesn't work, maybe have a one-on-one question with him in a moment. Thank you, everybody. Help me thank the panel for such a great job today. Thank you for being here. All right, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
As always,
Actually, I
thank
can bring